What if I told you that a woman spent 20 years of her life married to a man who didn't even exist? That every kiss, every anniversary, every moment of intimacy was part of an elaborate revenge plot that began before she was even born? Sarah Mitchell thought she was living the American dream. Mansion in Greenwich, charity galas, a successful husband who adored her. But when she followed him to a five-star hotel and discovered him with his young mistress, that was just the beginning of a nightmare that would expose a conspiracy so twisted, it sounds like fiction. Her husband wasn't just cheating. He wasn't just stealing. He had murdered her father, stolen her identity, and spent 2 decades systematically destroying her life as part of a family vendetta that went back generations. And the most terrifying part? She almost let him get away with it. This isn't just a story about infidelity or financial fraud. This is a story about how the people closest to us can be our greatest enemies, how the most dangerous predators hide behind loving smiles, and how sometimes the only way to survive is to become someone you never thought you could be. Over the next hour, you're going to witness one of the most shocking reversals of fortune ever documented. You'll see a woman go from victim to warrior, from hunted to hunter. You'll discover how a billionaire's daughter was systematically stripped of everything she owned by the man who promised to love and protect her. But here's what makes this story truly incredible. She didn't just survive. She turned her destruction into other people's salvation, transforming a personal nightmare into a mission that would save thousands of other victims. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear will change the way you think about trust, love, and the people you think you know best. This is the story of Sarah Roosevelt and how she discovered that sometimes the greatest victory comes from the ashes of total defeat. The black Bentley Continental purred to a stop outside the Roosevelt Grand Hotel in Manhattan. James Mitchell stepped out, adjusting his $15,000 Armani suit with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the world. At 52, his silver hair and commanding presence made him look every inch the real estate mogul worth $2 billion, or so everyone thought. "Oh my God, Jim, this place is incredible," breathed Ashley Taylor, his 28-year-old assistant, who had become much more than that 6 months ago. Her blonde hair cascaded perfectly over her designer dress as she pulled out her phone to live stream to her 500,000 Instagram followers. "Hey, gorgeous souls," Ashley chirped into her camera. "Guess where your girl is today? The Roosevelt Grand with my amazing boyfriend. This is literally where billionaires come to play." She panned the camera to show Jim, who smiled indulgently. He loved being displayed like a trophy. Jim had told his wife, Sarah, he would be in emergency business meetings all weekend. She had simply kissed his cheek and wished him luck, as she always did. After 20 years of marriage, Sarah Mitchell had become perfectly predictable. She would spend the weekend arranging flowers, attending charity committee meetings, and being the ideal corporate wife. What Jim did not know was that Sarah had discovered the hotel reservation confirmation on his laptop the night before. She had stared at the screen for a full 10 minutes, her hands trembling. The Roosevelt Grand was not just any hotel. It was the crown jewel of the Roosevelt Hotel Group, founded by her late father, Thomas Roosevelt. Sarah sat in the library of their Greenwich mansion, surrounded by her father's old business documents. She had never paid much attention to the complicated trust arrangements after his death 15 years ago. Jim had handled everything, explaining that the legal language was too complex for her to understand. He had been so caring, so protective. Now, as she read through the papers with new eyes, a sick feeling grew in her stomach. Her father had left her everything, but somehow she had never seen a penny. Jim had convinced her that the inheritance was tied up in legal complications, that they needed to live off his income while the lawyers sorted things out. But here was a reservation at her family's hotel, charged to a credit card she did not recognize. Ashley Taylor was listed as the second guest. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed the family attorney, David Patterson. He had been her father's lawyer for 30 years. "Sarah, what a surprise." David's voice was warm but cautious. "How can I help you?" "David, I need to ask you about my father's will, the trust arrangement. Jim always said it was complicated, but I think I need to understand it better." There was a long pause. "Sarah, we should meet in person. Can you come to my office Monday morning?" "This cannot wait until Monday, David. Please, just tell me the truth." Another pause, then a sigh. "Sarah, your father left you sole ownership of the Roosevelt Hotel Group and a trust fund worth approximately $500 million. The arrangements were complex to protect you from exactly what I am afraid has been happening. The phone slipped from Sarah's hand and clattered to the floor. Meanwhile, at the Roosevelt Grand, Jim was holding court in the hotel's exclusive penthouse restaurant. He had invited 3 potential investors to discuss a new development project, but his mind was on Ashley, who was upstairs in their suite getting ready for dinner. The Hudson Yards project is going to revolutionize Manhattan real estate, Jim told his guests, his voice full of conviction. What he did not tell them was that Hudson Yards was hemorrhaging money, that he had been moving funds from other projects to keep it afloat, and that he was now desperately seeking new investors to cover the losses. His phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "Babe, room service is here with champagne. This suite is insane. I love you." Jim smiled. Ashley made him feel young, powerful, desired. Sarah had become background noise in his life, a pleasant but unremarkable fixture. Ashley was fire and ambition and youth. She represented everything he wanted to be. What Jim did not know was that his perfect weekend was about to become his perfect nightmare. As he raised his wine glass to toast his investors, Sarah was in her car, driving toward Manhattan with a box of legal documents and a determination that had been building for 20 years. The game was about to change, and Jim Mitchell had no idea he was no longer playing alone. Sarah sat in David Patterson's office at 8 in the morning, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The documents spread across the mahogany table told a story of systematic theft that made her feel physically sick. "Your father suspected something like this might happen," David explained gently. Jim's background check revealed some concerning patterns in his previous business dealings. That is why the trust was structured so carefully. Sarah stared at bank statements showing transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. "Jim had me sign these papers 5 years ago. He said they were tax documents." "They were power of attorney forms," David said quietly. "He has been accessing your trust fund for 15 years, Sarah. Nearly $50 million. The number hit her like a physical blow. $50 million. Money that should have been funding children's hospitals, scholarships, the charitable foundation her father had dreamed of. Instead, it had been funding Jim's lifestyle, his business mistakes, and apparently his affairs. "There is more," David continued, sliding another folder across the table. "Private investigator reports from the last 6 months. Your husband's relationship with Ashley Taylor is just the latest. There have been others." Sarah looked at photographs of Jim with various young women over the years. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, jewelry purchases, all funded with her money. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Your father made me promise to let you discover the truth on your own. He believed that you needed to be ready to fight back. He said if I intervened too early, Jim would just become more careful, more manipulative." Sarah stood up abruptly and walked to the window overlooking Manhattan. "I need to confront him. Today." "Sarah, be careful. Jim is desperate. Our investigators believe his business is failing. He may become dangerous if he feels cornered." Meanwhile, at the Roosevelt Grand, Jim was having the best morning of his life. The investors had agreed to fund his Hudson Yards project. Ashley was posting photos of their luxurious suite to massive social media engagement. He felt untouchable. "Breakfast in bed with my king," Ashley captioned a photo of Jim reading the Wall Street Journal while she fed him strawberries. "This is what real love looks like, besties." Jim's phone rang. "Sarah." "Good morning, darling," he answered smoothly. "How are the flowers coming along?" "Where are you, Jim?" Sarah's voice was different, colder. "I told you, sweetheart. Business meetings, very boring stuff. You would not be interested." "I am very interested, actually. I would like to join you for lunch today." Jim felt a flicker of unease. "That is not necessary, Sarah. You know how tedious these financial discussions can be. I insist. Text me the address." The line went dead. Jim stared at his phone, his perfect morning suddenly feeling less perfect. Ashley noticed his expression. "Everything okay, babe?" "My wife wants to have lunch," Jim said, his mind racing. "So? Just tell her you are busy." Ashley was already thinking about her afternoon spa appointment and the content she could create from it. "It is complicated." Jim was calculating options. He could make up another lie, claim the meetings had moved locations. But Sarah had sounded strange, determined in a way that was not like her. Jim, you promised me this weekend was about us. You said you were going to tell her about us soon anyway. Ashley's voice had taken on the petulant tone that usually annoyed him, but today it just added to his stress. I will handle it, Jim said, but for the first time in years he was not sure he could. 3 hours later, Sarah walked into the Roosevelt Grand's marble lobby, wearing a navy blue suit that made her look nothing like the soft, accommodating wife Jim was used to. She moved with purpose toward the concierge desk. I would like to speak with Robert Kane, please, she told the impeccably dressed woman behind the counter. Do you have an appointment with Mr. Kane? Tell him Sarah Roosevelt is here. The concierge's eyes widened slightly. She made a quick phone call, then smiled. Mr. Kane will see you immediately. Top floor, private elevator. As Sarah rode up to the penthouse office, she did not know that Robert Kane had been waiting for this moment for 15 years. Her father's best friend and business partner had been watching, documenting, and preparing for the day when Sarah would finally be ready to reclaim what was rightfully hers. The elevator doors opened to reveal a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Sarah Roosevelt, he said warmly, your father would be so proud of you today. Mr. Kane, I need your help. I think my husband has been stealing from my family's trust. Robert Kane smiled. My dear, I do not think he has been stealing. I know he has, and today we are going to stop him. Sarah found Jim in the Roosevelt Grand's exclusive restaurant, sitting at a corner table with 3 men in expensive suits. He looked up as she approached, and she saw a flash of something in his eyes. Fear. Sarah, darling, what a wonderful surprise. Jim stood and kissed her cheek, but his voice was tight. Gentlemen, this is my beautiful wife, Sarah. The investors smiled politely, but Sarah barely acknowledged them. Her eyes were locked on Jim's. I need to speak with you privately, she said. Of course, sweetheart. Gentlemen, please excuse us for just a moment. Jim guided Sarah to an empty table by the window, his hand firm on her elbow. What is this about, Sarah? You are acting very strange. Sarah placed a manila folder on the table between them. This is about $50 million, Jim. This is about 15 years of lies. Jim's face went white. He opened the folder and saw bank statements, power of attorney documents, private investigator reports. His hands began to shake. Sarah, I can explain everything. Can you explain Ashley Taylor? Sarah's voice was steady, but Jim could see the fury burning behind her calm exterior. How do you? That is not what you think. What I think is that you have been systematically stealing from my trust fund to finance your failing business and your affairs. What I think is that you have been lying to me for our entire marriage. Jim looked around the restaurant desperately. Other diners were beginning to stare. Sarah, please keep your voice down. We can discuss this at home. No, Jim. We will discuss this here and now, in my family's hotel, with my family's money that you have been stealing. At a nearby table, Ashley was having lunch with a fashion blogger, live streaming their meal to her followers. She had not noticed Jim and Sarah, but her camera was pointed in their direction. Oh my God, you guys, Ashley said to her phone. There is some major drama happening over there. This woman is totally going off on this guy. Hold on, let me get a better angle. She moved her phone to capture Jim and Sarah's table, not recognizing the woman as Jim's wife. You want to know the truth, Sarah? Jim's voice was rising now, his desperation making him reckless. Yes, I used some of your trust money, but it was for us, for our lifestyle. Do you think your charity work and flower arranging pay for that house in Greenwich? For your cars? For your clothes? Some. Sarah's voice was incredulous. $50 million is some. I was investing it, making it grow. Your father left you a bunch of old hotels and outdated investments. I turned it into something real. You turned it into nothing. Your Hudson Yards project is failing, Jim. You have been moving money around like a shell game, hoping no one would notice. Ashley's live stream was now focused entirely on their table. Her followers were commenting rapidly, trying to figure out what was happening. OMG, is this a divorce drama? One comment read. This is better than reality TV, read another. That guy looks familiar. Isn't he some real estate guy? Jim saw Ashley's phone pointed at them and realized the conversation was being broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. Panic set in completely. "Sarah, stop this right now. You are embarrassing both of us." "I am embarrassing us?" Sarah stood up, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "You brought your mistress to my family's hotel, and you are worried about embarrassment?" The restaurant had gone completely silent. Every eye was on them. Ashley's camera captured Jim's face as he realized his wife knew about their relationship. Her followers watched in real time as his expression moved from panic to rage. "Your family's hotel?" Jim laughed bitterly. "Sarah, you do not own anything. I have power of attorney. I control everything. You are just a housewife who arranges flowers." It was the wrong thing to say. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a legal document. "Not anymore," she said, placing it on the table. "As of this morning, your power of attorney has been revoked. As of this morning, I have resumed control of my trust fund and all Roosevelt family assets." Jim grabbed the document and read it quickly. His face went from white to gray. "You cannot do this, Sarah. We are married. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," said a voice behind him. Jim turned to see two police officers approaching their table. Detective Lisa Rodriguez showed her badge. "James Mitchell, you are under arrest for embezzlement and fraud." Ashley's live stream captured everything. Jim being handcuffed in the middle of the elegant restaurant. Sarah standing tall and composed as her husband of 20 years was led away in handcuffs. The other diners applauding softly. Ashley finally realized who the woman was and dropped her phone in shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That is his wife." But Sarah was not looking at Ashley. She was looking at Robert Kane, who had appeared at her side with a gentle smile. "Phase 1 complete," he said quietly. "Phase 1? Sarah asked. "My dear, that was just the beginning. We have much more work to do." As Jim was led away, he turned back to Sarah with an expression of pure hatred. "This is not over," he shouted. "You have no idea what you have started." But Sarah was beginning to understand that Jim was wrong about that too. She knew exactly what she had started, and she was just getting warmed up. The video of Jim's arrest went viral within hours. Ashley's live stream had captured everything, and now millions of people were watching the real estate mogul being led away in handcuffs while his composed wife stood watching. The comments were brutal. "She is a queen for this. That man got what he deserved. The wife's energy is everything." But in the Manhattan Detention Center, Jim was far from defeated. He made his one phone call to his lawyer, Marcus Webb, one of the most ruthless defense attorneys in New York. "Marcus, I need you here now. They are trying to frame me." "Jim, what happened? The entire internet is watching you get arrested." "My wife has lost her mind. She is making wild accusations about embezzlement. You know how unstable she has been since her father died." It was a lie, but it was a lie Jim had been carefully constructing for years. In therapy sessions he had secretly recorded, at dinner parties where he subtly questioned Sarah's memory, in private conversations with friends where he expressed concern about her mental health. He had been building a narrative of an unstable wife who could not be trusted. "I need you to get me out of here, and then we need to go on the offensive," Jim continued. "I have evidence that Sarah has been suffering from severe depression and paranoid delusions. She is not competent to make financial decisions." Meanwhile, Sarah was in Robert Kane's office, learning just how deep Jim's deception had gone. "Your husband has been planning this for years," Robert explained, showing her files full of documents. "The therapy recordings, the subtle comments to your friends about your mental health, the way he isolated you from your father's business associates. He was building a case to have you declared mentally incompetent." Sarah felt sick. "He recorded my therapy sessions?" "We believe so. He has been documenting every time you seem confused or upset, every time you deferred to his judgment. He was creating a paper trail that would support a claim that you are not capable of managing your inheritance." Robert pulled out another file. "But we have been documenting too. Every affair, every financial irregularity, every lie. Your father suspected Jim from the beginning and hired private investigators." "My father knew?" "Your father was a very wise man, Sarah. He loved you, but he did not trust your husband. That is why the trust was structured the way it was. Jim thought he was manipulating you into signing power of attorney documents, but actually, those documents were designed to expose his theft. Sarah stared at the evidence spread across the table. So this was all a trap? A trap he walked into willingly because of his own greed and arrogance. But their celebration was premature. Within 6 hours, Jim was released on bail, and his counterattack began immediately. Marcus Webb held a press conference outside the courthouse, with Jim beside him looking appropriately devastated. My client is the victim of a malicious prosecution orchestrated by his mentally unstable wife, Webb announced to the gathered reporters. Mr. Mitchell has spent 20 years caring for a woman who has suffered from severe depression and paranoid delusions. Instead of gratitude, he is being repaid with false accusations. Jim stepped forward, his voice breaking with apparent emotion. I love my wife, but she needs help. She has been struggling with mental health issues for years. I have recordings of her therapy sessions where she admits to feeling paranoid and confused. I never wanted this to become public, but I cannot let her destroy both our lives with these fabricated charges. The narrative was powerful and Jim sold it perfectly. By evening, the story had shifted. Social media was now full of comments supporting Jim and questioning Sarah's mental state. Poor guy has been taking care of his crazy wife for 20 years. She probably made up the whole thing in her head. Rich women always think someone is stealing from them. Sarah watched the press conference from Robert's office, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. They are going to paint me as the crazy wife, she said quietly. Yes, they are, Robert agreed. Jim is very good at manipulation, but we have something he does not know about. What? Ashley Taylor is not who she appears to be. At that moment, Ashley was in her trendy Chelsea apartment, staring at her phone as the comments poured in. Her followers had turned on her after learning she was the mistress, and brands were already pulling sponsorship deals. But Ashley had a secret that would change everything. She was not just an ambitious social media influencer sleeping with a married man. She was Detective Ashley Chen of the NYPD Financial Crimes Unit, and she had been undercover for 8 months, gathering evidence of Jim's fraudulent business practices. Her phone rang. It was her handler, Captain Rodriguez. How are you holding up, Chen? I am blown, Captain. My cover is completely destroyed, but I got everything we need. Jim confessed to multiple financial crimes during our relationship. The wire recordings are devastating. Good work, but we have a problem. His lawyer is claiming his wife is mentally unstable. If that narrative takes hold, it could undermine the entire case. Ashley looked at herself in the mirror. She had gotten close to Jim to catch a criminal, but watching him destroy his wife on television made it personal. Captain, I want to testify. I want to tell the truth about who Jim Mitchell really is. Are you sure? This will end your undercover career. I am sure. Some things are more important than a career. As night fell over Manhattan, the battle lines were drawn. Jim thought he had successfully shifted the narrative, painting himself as the victim of a mentally unstable wife. Sarah was beginning to understand just how thoroughly she had been manipulated and isolated. But neither of them knew about Ashley's true identity or about the recordings that would prove who was really telling the truth. The war was just beginning. The next morning brought what seemed like devastating news for Sarah. The New York Post headline screamed, "Crazy Iris Frames Devoted Husband." The accompanying article painted Jim as a long-suffering spouse who had sacrificed his own happiness to care for his mentally ill wife. Sarah sat in Robert Kane's office, staring at the newspaper with growing horror. They are destroying my reputation. It gets worse, Robert said gently, sliding another document across the desk. Jim's lawyers filed a motion this morning. They want you declared mentally incompetent and are requesting that Jim's power of attorney be reinstated. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Can they do that? They can try. They have those therapy recordings, testimonials from friends who will say you seem confused or paranoid. They are building a case that you are not capable of managing your own affairs. Sarah's phone buzzed with text messages from former friends, all expressing concern about her mental health and suggesting she seek help. Some were clearly coordinated, but others seemed genuine. Jim had been laying this groundwork for years, but then Detective Rodriguez called with news that changed everything. Sarah, I need you to come to the precinct immediately. We have a witness who wants to testify on your behalf. An hour later, Sarah found herself in an interview room face to face with Ashley Taylor. The young woman looked different somehow, more serious, less performative. Before I say anything, Ashley began, I need you to know that I am Detective Ashley Chen, NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. I have been undercover for 8 months, investigating your husband's business practices. Sarah stared at her in shock. You are a police officer? Yes. And I have recordings of Jim admitting to stealing from your trust fund, manipulating your mental health treatment, and planning to have you declared incompetent so he could access the rest of your inheritance. Ashley played a recording on her phone. Jim's voice was clear and unmistakable. Sarah is so easy to manipulate. Her therapist thinks she is making real progress, but I have been feeding her information that makes her doubt herself. By the time I am done, no court will believe she is competent to manage her own money. Another recording. The beauty of the Roosevelt Trust is that Sarah never bothered to understand it. She just signs whatever I put in front of her. I have been moving money around for years and she has no idea. Sarah listened to the man she had loved for 20 years, casually discussing her destruction, and felt something inside her break and rebuild simultaneously. There is more, Ashley continued. Jim has been running a Ponzi scheme with his real estate investments. He has been using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors and using your trust fund to cover the gaps. When it collapses, and it will collapse soon, dozens of families will lose their retirement savings. Sarah looked at Detective Rodriguez. What does this mean for the case? It means we have him dead to rights on multiple felony charges. The mental competency angle becomes irrelevant when we can prove he was secretly recording your therapy sessions and manipulating your treatment. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a surge of hope. So this is over? Not quite, Ashley said carefully. Jim does not know I am a police officer yet. As far as he knows, I am just his angry ex-mistress. We want to set up a meeting where he will incriminate himself further, not knowing he is being recorded. What kind of meeting? He has been trying to contact me since his arrest, probably wanting to make sure I will not testify against him. We want you to be there when I meet with him. Let him think he is manipulating both of us. That evening, Ashley called Jim and agreed to meet him at an upscale bar in Midtown. She wore a wire and positioned herself where surveillance cameras could capture everything. Jim arrived looking haggard but confident. He thought he was meeting with a discredited mistress who could be bought or intimidated. Ashley, thank God you agreed to see me. This whole situation is insane. Is it? Because your wife seemed pretty convincing when she said you stole $50 million. Sarah is mentally ill, Ashley. She has been for years. I have been protecting her, but she has finally crossed a line where I cannot help her anymore. So you did not steal any money? Of course not. I have been managing her trust fund because she's not capable of doing it herself. Everything I did was to protect her and our family. Ashley leaned forward. But what about Hudson Yards? She said that was failing. Jim's expression shifted. This was the opening he had been waiting for. Hudson Yards is fine. Actually, it is more than fine. I am about to close a deal that will make me independently wealthy. I will not need Sarah's money anymore. What kind of deal? A group of foreign investors want to buy me out for $800 million. The contracts are being finalized this week. It was a complete lie, but Jim was now so deep in his deception that he could not stop himself from spinning bigger and bigger stories. Ashley, I want you to know that you mean everything to me. Sarah was just an obligation, a burden I carried because of her father's money. You are my future. The wire captured everything. Jim's casual admission that his marriage was purely financial, his lies about the foreign investors, his continued claims about Sarah's mental state. But as Ashley walked out of the bar, she did not notice the black sedan that had been following her all evening. Jim had hired a private investigator to document her activities, and now he had photographs of her entering and leaving a police precinct. By morning, Jim's lawyers would know exactly who Ashley really was, and the advantage would shift once again. Sarah's brief moment of hope was about to become another devastating blow. Sarah woke up to her phone ringing at 6 in the morning. It was Detective Rodriguez, and her voice was tense. Sarah, we have a problem. Jim knows about Ashley. His private investigator photographed her leaving our precinct yesterday. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What does that mean? It means our entire case just became compromised. Jim's lawyers are claiming entrapment, that we used an undercover officer to seduce their client and manipulate him into making incriminating statements. Within hours, the story had exploded across social media. Jim's lawyer held another press conference, this time with a new narrative that was even more damaging. My client was the victim of an elaborate police sting operation, Marcus Webb announced. An undercover officer seduced him and manipulated him into making statements that have been taken completely out of context. This is prosecutorial misconduct of the highest order. Jim stood beside his lawyer, looking like a man who had been betrayed by the system. I trusted someone I thought cared about me, only to discover she was working for the police. How many other recordings were edited? How many other statements were manipulated? The implications were devastating. Every piece of evidence Ashley had gathered was now suspect. The recordings could be challenged as entrapment. Her testimony would be discredited because of their personal relationship. But the worst was yet to come. Sarah was having lunch with Robert Kane when his assistant rushed into the restaurant, whispering urgently in his ear. Robert's face went pale. "Sarah, we need to leave immediately." "What happened?" "Federal agents just raided my office. They have a warrant claiming I have been part of a conspiracy to defraud the Roosevelt Trust." As they hurried out of the restaurant, Sarah's phone exploded with notifications. The story was everywhere. Hotel magnate accused of conspiracy to defraud IRS. The federal complaint painted a devastating picture. It claimed that Robert Kane had been systematically looting the Roosevelt Trust for years, and that Sarah's recent actions were actually part of an elaborate cover-up to hide his theft. According to the complaint, Kane had convinced Sarah that Jim was stealing money to distract from his own crimes. The private investigators, the carefully preserved documents, even Ashley's undercover operation were all part of a conspiracy to frame Jim for crimes that Kane himself had committed. "This is insane," Sarah said as they sat in Robert's car, afraid to go back to either of their homes. "You have been helping me. Sarah, you need to understand something. These charges are completely fabricated, but they are also very clever. Jim's lawyers have found a way to turn our entire case against us." Robert's phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Robert, do not say anything to anyone without me present. They are claiming you embezzled over $200 million from the Roosevelt Trust over the past 15 years. They are saying you manipulated Sarah into believing Jim was the thief to cover your own crimes." Sarah stared at Robert. $200 million? But the trust fund was only worth $500 million to begin with. "Exactly," Robert said grimly. "If their story is true, then most of your inheritance is already gone, and I am the one who stole it." That evening, Sarah sat alone in a downtown hotel room, watching her life implode on television. The news anchors were calling it one of the most complex financial fraud cases in recent memory. "The question now is whether Sarah Mitchell was a victim or a co-conspirator," one anchor said. "Federal prosecutors are reportedly considering charges against her as well." Sarah's phone rang. It was her mother calling from Florida. "Sarah, honey, I just saw the news. Are you all right?" "Mom, I do not know what is real anymore. Everyone I trusted has been lying to me." "Sweetheart, maybe you should consider that Jim was telling the truth. He called me yesterday, and he sounded so worried about you. He said you have been having paranoid episodes, that you have been seeing conspiracies everywhere." Sarah felt her last anchor to reality slipping away. Even her own mother was beginning to believe Jim's story. "Mom, he stole from me. I have proof." "Do you, honey? Because the news is saying that Robert Kane stole from you and that you helped him frame Jim to cover it up." After her mother hung up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness, realizing that Jim's masterpiece was complete. He had not just stolen her money, he had stolen her reality, her relationships, her sense of what was true and what was false. Tomorrow, the federal prosecutors would probably offer her a deal, testify against Robert Kane, and admit her role in the conspiracy, or face charges herself. Sarah had gone from victim to criminal in less than a week, and she could not see any way out of the trap that had been built around her. But sometimes when you have lost everything, you discover what you are really made of. And Sarah was about to discover that she was her father's daughter after all. 3 days later, Sarah sat in a federal courthouse conference room, facing the most important decision of her life. Across the table sat Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Thompson, flanked by FBI agents and federal prosecutors. Her court-appointed lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, looked overwhelmed by the complexity of the case. "Miss Mitchell, we are prepared to offer you a plea agreement," Thompson began, "in exchange for your testimony against Robert Kane and your admission of guilt in the conspiracy to defraud the Roosevelt Trust. We will recommend a sentence of 5 years probation in full restitution." Sarah stared at the document in front of her. By signing it, she would admit to crimes she did not commit, betray a man who had tried to help her, invalidate every lie Jim had told about her mental state. "What if I refuse?" "Then you will face the same charges as Mr. Kane. Conspiracy, fraud, money laundering. You could be looking at 20 years in federal prison." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the plea agreement. The case against her was circumstantial but compelling. Her sudden discovery of Jim's crime seemed too convenient. Her close relationship with Kane looked suspicious. The timing of Ashley's investigation appeared coordinated. "Can I have a moment to think?" "Of course, but Mr. Kane is being arraigned this afternoon. Once that happens, the offer expires." Jennifer Walsh leaned over to whisper in Sarah's ear. "Take the deal, Sarah. I have seen the evidence they have against you. A jury would probably convict." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about her father. Thomas Roosevelt had built an empire through intelligence, patience, and careful planning. He had never made an impulsive decision in his life. "I need to make a phone call," Sarah said. In the hallway outside the conference room, Sarah dialed the one number she had not tried yet. Her father's oldest friend and former business partner, William Morrison, who lived in retirement in California. "Sarah, my dear, I have been following the news. I am so sorry about all of this. Bill, I need to ask you something about my father. Did he ever mention being concerned about Jim?" There was a long pause. "Sarah, your father made me promise never to tell you this unless something terrible happened. I think that time has come." "Tell me what?" "Your father knew about Jim's criminal background. Before you married him, we hired investigators. Jim had been involved in financial fraud before, but he had never been prosecuted. Your father tried to warn you, but you were so in love." Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. "So he set up the trust to protect me." "More than that, Sarah. Your father created multiple layers of protection. Robert Kane was just the first layer. There are others." "What do you mean?" "If something happened to Kane, if the first plan failed, your father arranged for backup systems, hidden accounts, secret documents, alternative trustees. Your father spent his entire life preparing for the possibility that someone would try to steal from you." Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. "Where are these backup systems?" "There is a safe deposit box at Manhattan Trust Bank, box number 479. The key is hidden in your father's desk at the Greenwich House, taped under the bottom drawer." Sarah hung up and immediately called a taxi. She had 3 hours before Robert Kane's arraignment, 3 hours before her plea deal expired. As her taxi raced toward Greenwich, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Do not go to the house. They are watching. Meet me at Grand Central. Information booth. 1 hour. Trust no one else. TM. TM. Thomas Morrison." But William Morrison was in California. Sarah stared at the text, her mind racing. Was this another trap? Another manipulation? But something about the message felt different. Her father had always said that in times of crisis, trust your instincts, not your fears. Sarah changed direction and headed for Grand Central Station. At the information booth, she waited nervously, scanning the crowd for threats. At exactly the appointed time, a young woman approached her. "Sarah Roosevelt?" "Yes." "My name is Teresa Morrison. I am William Morrison's daughter. My father sent me because your phones are being monitored. I have something for you." Teresa handed Sarah a small key and a folded piece of paper. "Your father gave this to my father 20 years ago, with instructions to give it to you only if you were in mortal danger. He said you would know what to do with it." Sarah unfolded the paper. In her father's handwriting was a single sentence. "The truth is in the foundation." The foundation. Her father's charitable foundation that had supposedly inherited his entire estate. The foundation that Jim had always said was worthless. Sarah looked at the key in her hand and realized that her father's final gambit was about to begin. She had 30 minutes to get to Manhattan Trust Bank before it closed. As she ran through Grand Central toward the subway, Sarah did not see the federal agents who had been following her or the black sedan that pulled away from the curb to trail her taxi. But for the first time in a week, Sarah felt like she was moving toward the truth instead of running from it. Her father had taught her that the best defense against a conspiracy was an even better conspiracy. It was time to find out what Thomas Roosevelt had really left behind. The safe deposit box at Manhattan Trust Bank contained documents that changed everything Sarah thought she knew about her father's death and her inheritance. As she spread the papers across the small viewing room table, a picture emerged of a man who had spent his final years preparing for a war he knew was coming. The first document was a letter in her father's handwriting, dated just 1 week before his death. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then my worst fears about your husband have come true. Everything you have been told about my will and the foundation is a lie. I did not leave my fortune to charity. I left it to you, but I hid it in a way that only you could find. Sarah's hands shook as she continued reading. James Mitchell is not who he claims to be. His real name is James Morrison, and he is the nephew of my former business partner, Harold Morrison, who tried to steal from me 30 years ago. This was always a family revenge plot, Sarah. You were never his wife. You were his target. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Jim was not even who he claimed to be. Their entire marriage had been an elaborate con game designed to steal her inheritance. The second document was a trust agreement that established the Thomas Roosevelt Foundation as a shell organization. All of the foundation's assets were actually held in a secondary trust with Sarah as the sole beneficiary. The foundation had been a decoy, designed to make it appear that Sarah had inherited nothing while actually protecting her entire inheritance. The third document was the most shocking of all. It was a complete dossier on James Morrison, including photographs of him using multiple identities, court records from previous fraud cases, and evidence that he had targeted at least 3 other wealthy women before Sarah. Robert Kane is my most trusted friend, but he is not the only one protecting you, her father's letter continued. I have arranged for others to watch over you, people you do not know exist. If Kane is compromised, they will reveal themselves. The final document was a bank statement showing that the Thomas Roosevelt Foundation held assets worth over $1 billion, not $500 million as Sarah had been told, but twice that amount. Her father had been systematically moving money into hidden accounts for years. Sarah sat back in her chair, trying to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. Jim had not stolen $50 million from a $500 million trust. He had stolen $50 million from a $1 billion fortune, and he had no idea how much money was actually there. Her phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh, her lawyer. Sarah, where are you? The prosecutors are looking for you. If you do not show up for the plea hearing, they will issue a warrant for your arrest. Jennifer, I need more time. I have found new evidence. What kind of evidence? Sarah looked at the documents spread before her. The kind that proves everyone has been lying about everything. After hanging up, Sarah photographed every document and uploaded them to a secure cloud storage account. Then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to Detective Rodriguez. I need protection, and I need to speak with the FBI agents who are investigating Robert Kane. The second was to an investigative journalist at the New York Times who had been following the case. I have documents that will blow this story wide open. The third was to Ashley Chen. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. When you were undercover with Jim, did he ever mention the name Harold Morrison? There was a long pause. Sarah, how do you know that name? Because Jim's real name is James Morrison. Harold Morrison was his uncle, and this whole thing has been a family revenge plot against my father. Oh my God. Sarah, you need to get somewhere safe immediately. If Jim realizes you know his real identity, you could be in physical danger. But it was too late for safety. As Sarah left the bank with the documents, she noticed the black sedan that had been following her all day. As she got into a taxi, the sedan pulled out behind her. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We have the documents from the bank. Stop investigating or your mother in Florida will have an accident. Sarah stared at the message in horror. They had been watching her the entire time. They knew about the safe deposit box, about the foundation documents, about everything. But they had made one crucial mistake. By threatening her mother, they had revealed that this was not just about money anymore. This was about eliminating everyone who knew the truth. Sarah made one final phone call, this time to William Morrison in California. Bill, I found my father's documents. I know who Jim really is. Sarah, thank God. I have been trying to reach you. Harold Morrison died in prison 3 years ago, but his sons have been carrying on his vendetta against your father. Jim is the youngest son. There are two others, and they are both in New York. How many people are involved in this? We think at least 6. They have been planning this for over 20 years, Sarah. Your father's death was not natural. They poisoned him slowly over months to make it look like cancer. The taxi pulled up to Sarah's hotel, but she could see men in suits waiting in the lobby. Bill, I think they are going to kill me. No, Sarah, you have something they need. The foundation documents you found are just the beginning. There is one more thing your father hid, and without it, they cannot access the real money. What? Your DNA, Sarah. The final trust requires DNA verification from a Roosevelt family member. They need you alive. Sarah's taxi driver was looking at her strangely in the rearview mirror. She realized he had been listening to her conversation. Let me out here, she said, throwing money at him and jumping out at a red light. As she ran through the crowded Manhattan streets, Sarah realized that her father's final gambit was not just about protecting her inheritance. It was about staying alive long enough to see justice done. Sarah spent the night in a 24-hour diner in Queens, using the restaurant's Wi-Fi to coordinate what would either be her salvation or her destruction. She had uploaded her father's documents to 6 different news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and a lawyer she had found online who specialized in complex fraud cases. By morning, the story had exploded. Billionaire heiress reveals family murder plot, screamed the headlines. The documents proved not only that Jim was an imposter, but that her father had been systematically poisoned, that the Roosevelt Trust contained twice as much money as anyone knew, and that a criminal family had spent 20 years planning the perfect theft. Sarah's phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Agent Sarah Kim from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. Miss Roosevelt, we need to bring you in immediately. You are in serious danger, and we have new information about your case. How do I know you are really FBI? How do I know this is not another trap? Because 30 minutes ago, we arrested James Morrison and 2 other members of his family at their hotel. We also arrested Marcus Webb, his lawyer, who was providing legal cover for the entire operation. Sarah felt a surge of relief so powerful she nearly collapsed. They are really under arrest? Federal charges, murder, conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, the works. But Miss Roosevelt, there is something else. Robert Kane is not guilty. He has been working with us for months. The federal case against him was a setup designed to flush out the other members of the Morrison family. Sarah stared at her phone. Robert is undercover too? Your father arranged for multiple backup plans. Kane was one. We were another. There are layers of protection your father put in place that we are still discovering. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a federal courthouse, but this time as a protected witness rather than a suspect. Across from her sat Jim Morrison, no longer the confident real estate mogul, but a man whose entire false identity had been stripped away. The federal prosecutor, Michael Thompson, was now working for Sarah rather than against her. Mr. Morrison, we have your confession from last night, but we want to hear it again in front of Miss Roosevelt. Jim looked at Sarah with undisguised hatred. You want to know the truth? Fine. Your father destroyed my family. Harold Morrison was his business partner, and when their company went public, your father cut him out of the profits. My uncle died broke and bitter. So you spent 20 years planning revenge, Sarah said quietly. I spent 20 years planning justice. You had everything handed to you. I had to work for every dollar, every connection, every opportunity. Marrying you was just business. And my father's death? Jim smiled coldly. Pancreatic cancer is so hard to detect early, especially when someone is helping it along with small doses of poison over several months. The confession was being recorded, and Jim seemed to take pleasure in finally revealing the scope of the conspiracy. The beauty of it was that you never suspected anything. You were so grateful to have a strong man taking care of you after your father died. You signed every document I put in front of you. But you never found the real money, Sarah said. Jim's smile faded. What real money? Agent Kim slid a document across the table. It was a bank statement showing the current value of the Thomas Roosevelt Foundation. $1.8 billion. Your father continued making investments after his death through automated systems, Kim explained. The foundation has been growing for 15 years. Miss Roosevelt is now worth nearly $2 billion. Jim stared at the number, his face going white. That is impossible. I monitored every account, every investment. You monitored the decoy accounts, Sarah said. My father knew you were watching. He gave you just enough real information to keep you busy while the real money was hidden somewhere you never thought to look. Where? Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. In plain sight, the Roosevelt Foundation has been operating legitimate charitable programs for 15 years. Schools, hospitals, scholarships. My father turned his revenge into something positive. That afternoon, Sarah held a press conference with her new legal team. The room was packed with reporters eager to hear from the woman who had survived one of the most elaborate financial conspiracies in American history. I want to thank the FBI, the MPD, and everyone who helped expose the truth, Sarah began. But mostly I want to thank my father, who spent his final years protecting me in ways I never could have imagined. A reporter raised her hand. What will you do with the money? The same thing my father intended. The Roosevelt Foundation will continue its charitable work, but we will also establish a new program to help other victims of financial fraud and domestic abuse. No one should have to go through what I experienced. Another reporter. Do you have any message for other women who might be in similar situations? Sarah looked directly into the camera. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. If someone tries to isolate you from your family, your friends, your own financial resources, that is a red flag. And remember that the people who love you want to see you strong and independent, not weak and dependent. As she left the courthouse, Sarah felt her phone buzz with a text from Ashley Chen. Proud of you? Drink soon? For the first time in 20 years, Sarah felt truly free. She had not just survived the trap that had been built around her, she had turned it into something that would help others avoid the same fate. Her father had been right. The best defense against a conspiracy was an even better conspiracy, especially when that conspiracy was designed to help people rather than hurt them. Justice, it turned out, was the sweetest revenge of all. 6 months later, Sarah Roosevelt stood in the penthouse office of the newly renovated Roosevelt Foundation headquarters, looking out over Manhattan as her father had done decades before. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. The Morrison family conspiracy had unraveled completely. Jim and his two brothers were serving federal sentences ranging from 30 to 50 years. Marcus Webb, their lawyer, had been disbarred and faced his own criminal charges. The entire network of enablers and co-conspirators had been exposed and prosecuted. But the most satisfying justice was what happened to Ashley Taylor's social media empire. When her true identity as Detective Ashley Chen was revealed, her followers initially felt betrayed. But as the full story emerged, public opinion shifted dramatically. Ashley's undercover work had exposed not just Jim's crimes, but a larger pattern of wealthy men using social media influencers to launder money and manipulate public opinion. Ashley had written a book about her experience, donating all proceeds to the Roosevelt Foundation's new program for victims of financial fraud. She had also started a nonprofit organization training social media influencers to recognize and report financial crimes. Sarah, the morning briefing is ready, said David Patterson, who had become the foundation's legal director after his role in protecting Sarah's inheritance became public. Sarah walked into the conference room where her team was assembled. Robert Kane, now officially the foundation's chairman, smiled as she entered. Good morning, everyone. What do we have today? 3 new cases, reported Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had transitioned from criminal defense to directing the foundation's victim services program. A woman in Texas whose husband has been forging her signature on real estate documents. An elderly man in Florida whose son is stealing from his retirement accounts. And a young couple in California who discovered their financial advisor has been embezzling from their college savings fund. Resources allocated? Legal teams dispatched to all 3 locations. We also have the technology team working on the new app that will help people identify financial red flags in their relationships. Sarah nodded. The foundation now employed over 200 people across the country, making it one of the largest organizations dedicated to fighting financial abuse and fraud. What about the congressional testimony next week? Robert answered. You are scheduled to appear before the House Financial Services Committee on Tuesday. They want to discuss federal legislation that would strengthen protections for victims of financial abuse. Sarah had become an unexpected advocate for legislative reform. Her case had highlighted gaps in federal law that allowed criminals like the Morrison family to operate for years without detection. She was working with lawmakers to close those gaps. And the documentary. Netflix confirmed the release date for next month, said Maria Santos, the foundation's communications director. Early reviews are very positive. They are calling it a masterpiece of investigative filmmaking. The documentary, titled The Roosevelt Conspiracy, had been produced with Sarah's full cooperation. She had decided that telling her story publicly was the best way to help other victims recognize similar patterns of abuse. Her phone rang. It was her mother calling from the new home Sarah had bought for her in a secure retirement community in Arizona. Hi, Mom. Sarah, honey, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. Your father would be so pleased with what you have accomplished. Thanks, Mom. I wish he could see it. Oh, sweetheart, I think he can. I think he planned all of this. After hanging up, Sarah walked back to the window. The city spread out below her looked different now. Instead of seeing towers of wealth and power, she saw millions of people trying to build honest lives and the predators who tried to exploit them. Her assistant knocked on the door. Sarah, there is someone here to see you. Says it is personal. Sarah looked up to see Detective Ashley Chen, now Captain Chen, standing in the doorway in her dress uniform. Ashley, congratulations on the promotion. Thank you. I wanted to tell you in person. We just arrested a group of investment advisors who were running a Ponzi scheme targeting military families. We used techniques we developed from your case. How many victims? Over 300 families. But because we caught it early, we will be able to recover most of their money. Sarah smiled. This was why the work mattered. Every case they solved, every pattern they identified, every predator they caught meant real families would keep their homes, their retirements, their children's college funds. Ashley, do you ever think about the path that brought us here? You mean how I had to seduce your husband to catch him stealing from you, and now we run charitable organizations together? Exactly, Ashley laughed. I think about it every day, and I think your father would be proud that his daughter turned a family curse into a family blessing. As the sun set over Manhattan, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost a marriage, but it had been built on lies anyway. She had lost her naive trust in people, but had gained wisdom and purpose. Most importantly, she had learned that victims do not have to stay victims. They can become warriors, and warriors can become healers. The Thomas Roosevelt Foundation would continue its work long after Sarah was gone, just as her father had planned. The best revenge against those who tried to destroy you was to build something beautiful from the wreckage they left behind. Sarah picked up her father's photograph from her desk. We did it, Dad. We turned their conspiracy into our legacy. Outside her window, the city lights began to twinkle like stars, each one representing a life, a family, a story. And Sarah knew that tomorrow the foundation would be there to help write better endings for as many of those stories as possible. The girl who had once arranged flowers in Greenwich had become the woman who arranged justice in Manhattan, and she was just getting started. If Sarah's story moved you, if it made you think differently about the relationships in your own life, or if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, I need your help spreading this message. Hit that like button if you believe every woman deserves to know the warning signs of financial abuse. Share this video with someone who might need to hear Sarah's story. Your share could literally save someone's life or their life savings. Drop a comment and let me know. What was the moment in this story that shocked you the most? Have you ever experienced manipulation in your own relationships? Your stories help create a community where people can recognize these patterns and protect themselves. And if you want to hear more incredible true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. We dive deep into real-life dramas that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. Remember, sharing Sarah's story isn't just entertainment, it's education, it's prevention, it's giving other potential victims the knowledge they need to protect themselves before it's too late. The most powerful thing you can do right now is hit that subscribe button and share this video, because somewhere out there, Someone is living Sarah's nightmare right now, and they don't even know it yet. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.